Today in Fulchester Crown Court, Sheena Smithson stands accused of attempting to murder her baby son Peter. Her husband and his mother have both given evidence against Sheena, claiming that she changed after Peter's birth, developing impulsive and dangerous moods. The witness currently giving evidence is the director of the local social services. At the close of yesterday's proceedings, he told how the accused had come to him pleading for help and had confessed to 2 prior assaults on Peter.
Yes, I see. And you say this meeting was in May?
On the 7th.
Now, was this your first such interview with the defendant?
It was.
Nevertheless, isn't it true she had been seeking help from your department for over a month?
Yes, I believe she had, and one of my assistants referred her to the infant's clinic.
To which she had already been. It was you she wanted to see, but this privilege was denied her.
I am director of an extremely busy department.
Oh, yes, extremely busy. And also this particular woman had a reputation for being something of a nuisance.
My lord.
Oh, I'll withdraw that question. Help was denied her in April.
Oh, no, that is not quite the case.
So it was natural enough that going back again in May, she'd have known a more extreme line was necessary if she was going to penetrate the red tape, get some kind of response.
She might have reacted
She
in
might.
that way.
Well, this woman was at her wit's end. She felt utterly isolated. She was desperate to get her family into a new home. And she knew that unless she came up with something completely out of the ordinary, she'd be turned away yet again.
The fact remains, Mr. Lotterby, that she told me she'd twice lost all self-control and could no longer trust herself with the child.
And, of course, with that sort of threat on record, you could ignore her no longer. Your offices are in County Hall?
Yes.
Where are also housed the departments of public health, education, housing, and so forth?
Yes.
So, presumably, you keep in close touch with these other departments?
We enjoy a fair degree of liaison.
And the defendant is, I believe, known not only to your department, but to most of the other departments as well.
She is indeed.
She has, over the years, registered a variety of complaints covering such things as fly and rodent infestations, the traffic dangers from the road outside, local hooliganism, noise, polluted water supplies.
Mr. Lotterby, are you asking the witness or telling the jury?
Asking the witness, my lord.
Well then, since his replies are bound to be based on hearsay, I suggest that you withdraw your question.
His answers need not necessarily be based on hearsay, my lord.
Indeed? And how is that?
For instance, her requests for alternative accommodation
would be a matter for the Housing Authority.
But whether or not the request was granted could depend on a recommendation from the Social Services Department from Mr. Webster.
I don't see what this has to do with rats, flies, and hooligans.
With respect, my lord, I submit that all these complaints are relevant to the single issue of the family's accommodation, and that they are matters which can properly be put to this witness.
Did you at any time recommend a change of accommodation for the Smithson family?
No, Your Lordship.
Thank you. Mr. Lotterby, you will withdraw your question.
With respect, my lord, before I do so, I would seek the court's
Mr. Lotterby,
indulgence
you
on
have
this.
heard my decision. The matter is concluded. Kindly continue with your cross-examination.
As your lordship pleases. Mr. Webster, this social worker you assigned to the Smithson's house, who was she?
Miss Alison James.
Yes. Now, was Miss James transferred from your department in mid-July last?
Yes.
Why was that?
I believe the reason stated in her application was that she felt that her views were no longer compatible with the policies of the department.
And why were they no longer compatible?
My lord, surely this is dragging us back again into the realms of hearsay.
Quite. Mr. Lotterby?
My lord, I shall be calling Miss James as a witness, so we shall be able to confirm it, whether true reasons for the transfer. Well, perhaps I could put it to you this way, Mr. Webster. Would I be right in saying that the reason Miss James left the department was because she disagreed with the department's view as to the proper housing for the family?
It was one of the areas of disagreement, as I recall. There were plenty of others.
But this was the crucial one. She wanted you to bring pressure on the housing authorities. You refused. There was a head-on clash, leaving her with no alternative but to seek a transfer.
Somewhat over-dramatized.
Really? Well, the jury will have a chance to decide that for themselves when Miss James gives evidence.
Precisely, Mr. Lotterby. And until she does, let's stop anticipating it, shall we?
My lord. Mr. Webster, I'm going to put it to you that Mrs. Sheena Smithson was indeed well known to you and your colleagues at County Hall, known as a nuisance and a troublemaker. Now, when she came to you in May with these wild claims and threats, you could risk ignoring her no longer. So you assigned Miss James, the most junior of your staff, onto a series of visits.
Oh, I must object to the
let me finish, please. When Miss James came back to you on the accommodation issue, you dug your toes in. There were limits. You'd already given in to the Smithson woman once by granting her a social worker, but as for allowing her to manipulate you into giving her a better flat, well, that was too much. Well, Mr. Webster?
Not only over-dramatized, but distorted beyond all semblance of the true situation.
Well, we shall see, Mr. Webster.
No further questions, my lord.
You may stand down, Mr. Webster.
That concludes the case for the prosecution, my lord.
Very well. Now, Mr. Lotterby.
With your lordship's permission, I should like to call as my first witness the doctor who has been treating Mrs. Smithson for some years. He has an urgent appointment this afternoon, my lord.
Have you any objection, Miss Tate?
No, my lord.
Very well.
I call Dr. William Park.
Dr. William Park, please.
He also treated baby Peter on his admission to hospital.
That's right. Though, of course, our consultant surgeon performed the actual craniotomy.
Mm-hmm. Now, Doctor, certain witnesses have referred to Peter's birth, and the suggestion is that it in some way induced a personality change in the defendant. Now, would you agree with that suggestion?
Well, a temporary reaction may be, but nothing permanent in Mrs. Smithson. There was postnatal depression, but that was only to be expected.
Why was that?
Well, to begin with, labour was started prematurely.
Was there a specific reason for that?
Well, according to Mrs. Smithson, she'd had a row with her husband, and he'd assaulted her. There was bruising on several places on her body.
And this assault caused her to go into labour?
About 3 weeks prematurely. The fetus was not properly aligned. A breech situation developed. We were left no alternative but a caesarean section.
I think I'm right in saying that the baby was put into an oxygen tent.
Yes, and as can sometimes happen, this led to a certain alienation on the part of the mother.
You mean because of the operation, Doctor?
No, sir. It's more that the infant isn't available when the mother recovers consciousness. The normal maternal instincts aren't triggered, lactation's affected. There's a whole lot of hormonal confusion, you could say.
And what effect might that have had on the defendant?
It could cause postnatal depression, and this in turn could affect the infant emotionally. A sort of vicious circle, if you like. There's no doubt she had a lot of difficulty with Peter, always restless and colicky, prone to minor infections, rashes, the lot.
Would the depressions have lasted long?
Not usually. But then, well, she did have 2 other young children already. And then Peter with all these problems. She's been inclined to get over-anxious, chronically short of sleep and so on.
Would these matters amount to a personality change, Doctor, or cause her mental condition to be described medically as abnormal?
Certainly not. I come into contact with scores of young mothers in the same boat. Worse, a lot of them.
When you examined Peter's condition in September, what were your conclusions as to the cause of his injury?
Well, I must say that I did not feel that they resulted from an assault by the defendant, since the injuries seemed perfectly consistent with her explanation.
And that was?
That he had tumbled down some concrete steps.
Yes. Did you know that forensic experts were unable to confirm her story?
Not until you tell me.
Yes. But from the injuries you treated, would you expect there to be any blood there on the stairs for them to find?
Minimal. Assuming it was the stairs, then the head must have struck on the flats and not the edges. Otherwise, the skin would have been severely split.
Doctor, were you surprised when you heard the police suspected this as a case of assault?
I was rather, because it was so unlike the usual baby-bashing case.
Oh, dear me. Baby bashing? I suppose you mean child assault.
Yes, sir. But if I could just explain the usual sort of pattern we watch out for.
Yeah.
For one thing, careful study of the bruises often shows finger patterns where the child's being grasped. I noticed none on Peter. Then again, there'll often be lacerations on the oral mucosa.
What?
The gums and lips, sir, due to forcible feeding by the mother. None on Peter. Then again, ocular injuries to the eyes, they're very common. And another thing we often come across are cigarette burns, but I noticed none on Peter.
Was there anything to lead you to conclude that this was a case of assault?
Nothing at all.
Thank you, Doctor.
Dr. Park, if I may say so, you give the impression of a young professional man most anxious to justify his actions.
I really don't see what you mean.
Well, as a doctor, is it not your duty to report a suspected case of assault to the police?
Well, if I suspected, yes.
However, isn't it also true to say that you're generally reluctant to do so, unless you're absolutely certain that there has been abuse?
I wouldn't say that.
Well, surely the need to keep on good terms with the parents, to avoid alienating them with your accusations of brutality. Now, surely this influences you.
Well, they don't have to know. We can always inform the children's officer or put the NSPCC onto it.
Oh, but even so, the parents are bound to find out who starts the witch hunt.
Not necessarily.
Come on, Doctor.
In any event, as I say, I was perfectly satisfied that Peter's injuries were accidental.
Ah, yes, and that his mother was not the usual baby-bashing type. Dr. Park, isn't Mrs. Smithson's a very familiar face in your waiting room?
Maybe, but not because of injuries to our children.
No, but because of all sorts of minor ailments. Suspected deficiencies, ear and eyesight checks.
So she's over-anxious.
And not least about herself.
Maybe, but as I said, we've loads of mothers who are worse.
But she is over-anxious, neurotic even.
I wouldn't call her neurotic.
Well, one more question, Dr. Park. You're still treating young Peter, I take it?
Yes.
Would you tell us of his current condition, please?
He's still critical.
Still in intensive care after 6 weeks.
Yes.
Is further brain surgery anticipated?
It may be necessary.
Thank you, Doctor.